Hey guys, welcome and thanks for joining in. I really appreciate you finding out time for us. I'm gonna talk today about HashiCorp solutions that can help you with the DPDP or to call it Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which was uh, enacted by Government of India in the last August. And this is one of the key considerations for a lot of business. But before I get into all those things, let me just tell you a little about myself. Thanks, Savanan, for introducing me to the team, to the people. My name is Amit. I am a senior solutions engineer based out of Bangalore for HashiCorp. I look after Pan India, the whole of India. I work with a lot of clients and the customers and the vendors and the partners and everybody. So any challenges, anything for technical things, you can always reach out to me. With that, let's look at the brief agenda that I prepared for you. I wanted to talk about a little about what is DPDP, what are the key requirements. Once we look at the requirements, what is DPDP and what are the requirements, and then we can probably get into what is the solutions or what are the solutions from HashiCorp that can help you mitigate the risk that you have with DPDP that's coming in. And post that, once we look at the solutions, maybe I'll help you with what is the next thing that you can do to get started. With that, let's get started. Uh, okay, so what is DPDP in all, right? DPDP or the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 is India's first privacy law that regulates the processing of the digital personal data of each and every individual. Even if the data is collected and digitized later, maybe your data is collected somewhere some time early, but it was digitized later. Even if the data was collected outside of India, but it's used to provide goods and services in India, then it is covered under the DPDP. So that is something that needs to be taken care of. It is a comprehensive multi-page documentation. You can see the first page on your screen right now. You can always scan the QR code that's there. It will take you to that page. So yeah, but please go ahead and scan that out later. It's a comprehensive multi-page documentation which goes into much details about who are the stakeholders. If you are a data principal or you are a data fiduciary or you are just a data processor, maybe your data is collected by someone else and you are just using that data or processing that data to take meaningful result out of it. If you are an appellate tribunal who's doing that, it defines the rights, responsibilities, and obligations that each and every party has, how to collect the data, how the processing of the data needs to happen, how the storage needs to happen, and everything. It gets into specific details about in context of data privacy and data security. That the act also has the provisions of penalty in both in terms of the data principal, which is probably you, or the data fiduciary who's collecting the data or who's the data processor. So it has clauses for penalty and as well. As I said, businesses now need to take care of how they collect the data, how they handle the data, how they manage the data, how they transfer the data, if they at all they are transferring the data to some other fiduciary or some other person to go ahead and probably work on the data, process the data, or maybe to a different geographical locations. So that is there. Let's double click on what are some of the key requirements for data for DPDP. Okay. So some of the key requirements that are dotted there on your screen is like data security and confidentiality, right? Organizations are bound to or mandated to implement robust security measures to protect the personal data from breaches and any unauthorized access by any other entity. So we can safely say that data should be encrypted, okay, and should be accessible to the right users only. The authorization and authentication becomes a key to this data which is stored. It goes ahead to consent management, which again is the data, whether the user has given the consent to have the data being used or not. That's important. Data minimization and purpose limitations. Once the data is used, there has to be some kind of a TTL that's going, and there has to be some kind of a policy that the data has to be does not have to be available at after a certain period of time that it's used. Then there is access control and auditability. That's also a key requirement when it comes to the data, right? Who can access the data? That's very important. We have to make sure we regulate who can access the data. There has to be an authentication that needs to happen, and as I said, there has to be authorization on what data is available, what keys are available, how can the data be decrypted or encrypted, or where it is stored, and that is what becomes key. And once that data is accessed, DPDP also makes sure that it has a clause that all the access to the data is logged. That logging and reporting is a key aspect of this DPDP Act as well. Then there is data portability and interoperability. Individuals who have the right to port the data, allowing them to transfer the data from one service provider to another. The data transfers are also restricted based on countries. Okay, so by default you can transfer the data to other countries or other geographical locations, but it's restricted to some of the countries. So again, the policy management for making sure the data is not transferred becomes key. Even if the data is leaked uh, or somehow being accessed in some of the restricted geographical locations, we need to have a policy and a mechanism to enforce that the data is not readable and not shareable across different geographies. Now, I can think of multiple products which we have at HashiCorp that can be key in achieving some of these requirements, right? Like all these requirements that have been stated, that have been detailed in the DPDP Act. I can think of a lot of technologies. Vault becomes key here. Okay, Vault is primary to go ahead and secure the data. There are various encryption methods, and I'll talk a little more about them in the future slides. It becomes key to making sure the data is encrypted. Okay, it also is key to have that authentication and authorization in place when the data is accessed by multiple users, multiple uh, services, or multiple providers, and everything. So it becomes key. Then boundary is one of the key elements here. Boundary can help you with the access of the system and data. It can make sure that you can regulate what data or what systems can be accessed by whom. On top of that, boundary can also help you ensuring that the user who's accessing the data does not have the credentials or does not have the access beyond a certain point in time. So TTL becomes one of the key aspects of all the products that we have. All the products, they enforce TTL. The services which are available or the credentials which are available live for a shorter period of time. And once the credentials are being used, these credentials are removed, so the credentials cannot be exploited. So that is something that comes into picture. I was talking a lot about policies, right? So you can write policies in something called Sentinel, which becomes key again. So Sentinel is a policy engine that can run. It works both with Vault and other products. It becomes a key to enforce these policies as well. All these, when all these things are done, everything is being logged, and the logs are detailed, which can be used for creating the reports or dashboards or anything that is required by the law or the regulation to make sure that that is available to the right authorities. So having said all that things, let's look at some of the HashiCorp solutions that can help you with all these things. And I'll probably not discuss all of them. I'll just discuss one or two of them. First one is encryption anywhere is something that is something that I'm very fond of. So Vault has various data protection capabilities. Okay, these data protection capabilities are designed to satisfy a full range of security and usability according to the user's need. Okay, it simplifies the protection of the data. It simplifies the protection of data in transit, in when the data is at rest, or it is at cloud or at data center. By providing the traditional data encryption, it can be your normal data encryption that needs to be done, or it can be the format preserving encryption, or maybe data masking. These things are mandated by a lot of regulatory authorities these days. So that is something that you can look at. There is another thing that comes with Vault is called data masking. You can mask the data as and when required. You can tokenize the data, which is again something which is coming up a lot in the regulations by a lot of regulatory authorities in India. You can have a central key management system, and that key management system can in turn go ahead and encrypt all the data that is there in different entities, maybe a database, maybe a data store somewhere, and you can go ahead and encrypt those data source data sets uh, or the databases using these key managements or using these key, and this can be rotated. Their whole life cycle of these key will be maintained by Vault. You don't have to worry about a thing. Looking a little more right into Vault, Vault provides encryption as a service with a centralized key management I was talking about, right? So Vault in itself does not go ahead and store the data. It'll encrypt the data, and it'll be available as we want to call it, like, or as we like to call it, encryption as a service, which simplifies the encrypting of data during transit or maybe at rest or wherever the data is stored. All actions that are there involved can be performed using multiple ways. It can be API driven or API driven encryption. You can encrypt and decrypt the application data with an HTTP API call. Okay, the key management, the encryption algorithm, or any other action that you want to offload or that you want to perform. All those things can be done using API. Apart from API, there is a UI which is available. There is a CLI method that can be used by users to go ahead and use Vault. Encryption key rolling, as I said, you don't have to worry about the life cycle management of the keys that are being generated. New keys will be rolled out and the infrastructure, and you don't have to do it manually. Vault also provides the protection with FIPS 140-2 and the cryptographic compliance, right? It integrates with FIPS 140-2 certified HSM boxes to ensure that the critical security parameters are protected and are compliant as per the regulatory needs of the data. Replication filters, you can have data set up in one vault and can replicate it to a different location and region. As I was talking about the geographic regions where the data should not be available or should not be accessible, right? You can restrict or you can filter what kind of a data keys or what kind of a data within vault can be replicated from one vault to another. That is something which is again important when it comes to vault. If I talk about Consul, which is another tool which integrates very well with Vault, right? You can create a very a very secure, trusted connection kind of a setup for your applications, right? And all the services. Nowadays, we see that the applications are broken down into large and large number of services, right? All these services need to connect to each other. So Consul gives you a kind of service registry help which will help you let the services access another service based on the policies that you create. So only the services that are required to connect with other services within the application, it will create a mess. Again, all the communication with the services externally and everything will be can be encrypted using a TLS or MTLS. MTLS requires the service to manually authenticate the connection, mutually authenticate the connection based on the trusted authority, right? Both these services has to mutually authenticate before they can make this connection. These certificates that are required for these TLS and the secured connections, right? They are generated and rolled or rotated by intermediate CA server, which Vault can also act as an intermediate CA server. And this can be done in an automated fashion or with minimal intervention. That is something which is key. Another solution that I can think of is your zero trust security, right? Here's your application and users, which is spread over a network. With zero trust, I would say that we recommend trust nothing and authenticate everything, be it a human user, be it a machine, be it any other kind of entity who's accessing the data, right? Or accessing the application has to be authenticated. So Vault enables the enterprise to centrally store and access, distribute any kind of secrets, any kind of tokens, passwords, certificates, or maybe encryption keys across any of the public cloud environment, and or anything, right? Any kind of environment. Uh, both the both the application and the user can kind of generate just-in-time credentials with Vault, right? They can create just-in-time credentials. Once the Vault is introduced, it can create just-in-time credentials for accessing the cloud or probably database. So hence, the credentials are now short-lived, and only the authorized user have the credentials for any particular given point in time. This can be regulated using policy. It can be from seconds or minutes to hours or days. So that kind of a credential can be generated. Once these credentials are generated, you can use the credential, or the user can use the credentials. When the use is done, or the policy dictates the credentials to be scrapped, right? The credentials will be removed from existence. It will be scrapped, or it will be removed. It will be scrubbed, and the user no longer has the credentials or the access to the database. This helps secure the applications and the application data uh, with the while the credential is not available for the user. The challenge these days is that we have a lot of entities, we have a lot of clouds, we have a lot of environments, right? Today we have an on-prem environment. Tomorrow we might have something over AWS or a public cloud. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, maybe we have something over GCP or Azure, or maybe any of the cloud providers, right? And all these cloud providers, right, they will have their own kind of authentication mechanism. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. So what Vault does is it acts as an identity broker. Okay, Vault can broker the identities of these users across multiple applications, multiple networks, or multiple such kind of entities. It can be cloud, it can be your network identities, it can be your application identity. All these things can be clubbed to make sure that we have a single entity which is available for Vault to authenticate and then provide the policy or enforce the policy that has been configured to ensure that the access which is approved or which is regulated as per the policy is provided to the user, and hence the data is secured. Hence, you are compliant with all these regulatory acts. That is something that is important to understand. Moving ahead with network and identity. Okay, so Consul enables the machine-to-machine access, enforcing the authentication between these services. I was talking about like multiple applications or multiple services which are interdependent or which need to communicate to each other, right? All those machine-to-machine communication, right? If you want to enforce authentication, that the connections between those applications, those services, those machines needs to be authenticated before they are approved or before the user can go ahead and use them. That can be done using Consul. Consul codifies the authorization and the traffic rules, right? You can codify what services can go ahead and access which all services, what and ensure that the traffic is encrypted. You can automate the identity-based access to these services. The Consul also actually lets you go ahead and discover the services which are deployed. Like let's say if you have some kind of a cloud service which is dynamic in nature, many times the services, the entity within the services come up and go down. Maybe a web server which is stateless, and many times based on the needs or based on the requirement, the services are expanded. Multiple servers are brought up, and they wind up was the the request subsides, right? So we can automate these service discovery, we can automate these network configurations, we can automate that whenever the service comes up, it is still making sure that those are secured, the connectivity is secured, there is no breach in that kind of connection. So that is something that is available. All these things, user gets or machine gets authenticated using Vault, the services are, or machines are getting authenticated and connecting. What is lacking is the human aspect of it, right? The human, the administrators will still have the credentials, will still be required to access the servers. You can introduce boundary into the mix. Now, boundary is a PAM solution, which is available for you to control how user to machine communication or user to human to machine access is provided. Traditionally, what we used to do is we used to have VPNs, we used to have bastion host or jump servers configured in all entities or all infrastructure that we have. We used to configure VPNs from one infrastructure to another. One that always was creating a challenge of latency, of the speed. Then there was a challenge of credential sprawl, right? Credentials used to be shared across the network, across different VPN connections, and that was always the challenge, right? So with Boundary introduced, right, Boundary can integrate with Vault and use that just-in-time credentials that I was talking about, so that the access provided to a particular database, to a particular portal or particular server, right, particular service gets regulated. Now the users are making, you can make sure that the users don't have any long-term living credentials, or even they don't even know about the credentials at all. They can go ahead and use that transparently. They can just go ahead, there is a host, they can just go ahead and click on connect, and the user gets connected. They don't have to go ahead and put in or key in any kind of credential. And hence, we can minimize the exposure that we have using credentials or using long-lived credentials, and those things can be minimized within the network. It can be set up across different clouds, so that centrally a user can go ahead and connect to multiple clouds, and they don't have to connect to those clouds or those bastion hosts to access those services. So that is what this zero trust security brings onto the table. Moving ahead, auditing and compliance. We can introduce Terraform. Terraform is infrastructure as a code solution, and everybody who knows HashiCorp or even has worked sometime in IT industry should be aware of Terraform, I guess. That provides a consistent solution for you to be able to deploy hundreds and hundreds of workloads across clouds, across different infrastructures, across the organizations and everything. It's up to you how you want to use it. So while we are doing that that infrastructure as a code, right, and I was talking about Sentinel and all those things. So there are policies that can be implemented that this connectivity or this infrastructure can only talk to this infrastructure. Those will again secure the data that's stored in the infrastructure that you're creating. One. The second thing is that you can also make sure that those policies enforce who can access that data. So all these Terraform, Vault, and Boundary, they come together and provide you a secure solution to ensure that your data is secured at all point in time, you're compliant, and you're not moving overboard, or you're not against the compliance like DPDP or any other regulatory compliance. So what next? If I talk about next, I can certainly go ahead, or we can certainly go ahead and have a technical follow-up. We can have a strategy day where we can help you understand the business value that the whole solution brings out to the table. We can have technical workshops. Please reach out to us. Please reach out to HashiCorp personnel, the community, the user group, and they will be able to help you understand how we can proceed with this. If you want to read a little more about the source of my data or the source of the solutions that I was talking about, here are the QR codes that you can scan and go ahead and read a little more about it. I'm happy to go ahead and interact with you and explain this in a little more detail and how exactly these work. Maybe you want to read about the Personal Data Protection Act. That's the link where you can go ahead and use that. So with that said, I think so I'll conclude the session. And yeah, 7 and you're still around.